Unburied Truths. The stories of these children confront us with truths that refuse to stay buried, literally and figuratively. Skeptics and believers alike find themselves challenged by the sheer volume of detail and verification in these cases. We can, of course, question and probe. Could the child have overheard some adult talking about the deceased? Could the parents be fabricating or prompting the story, intentionally or unintentionally? Could it all be a series of coincidences? Healthy skepticism is always warranted, but at a certain point, one must contend with the accumulated weight of evidence. And in these reincarnation files, as we might call them, the evidence often points to something beyond what conventional science can easily explain. Skeptics have posited various theories. They suggest that perhaps the child picked up information through normal means, overhearing a conversation perhaps, or being subconsciously coached by an adult who knew the deceased. Imagination and fantasy play are other go-to explanations. Children have active imaginations, and maybe these past life narratives are just elaborate make-believe that adults are taking too seriously. Others invoke cryptomnesia, the idea that we might unknowingly recall facts we encountered but forgot. Though it's hard to argue a toddler had cryptomnesia about obscure historical data or the personal details of a stranger's life. In more accusatory tones, some skeptics suggest outright fraud. Could the families be lying for attention or money? In most of these cases, however, that seems highly implausible. Many of these families come from humble backgrounds and avoid publicity, and often the events are investigated by third parties, like researchers or journalists. The skeptical counters fall short, especially when confronted by the unexplainable specifics of many cases. Children have provided names, dates, and facts that they simply had no normal way of knowing. For example, a child might recall the exact full name of their past life persona and the full name of their murderer, details later confirmed in public records. Others have remembered highly technical or localized information, the layout of a village they've never been to, the inner workings of a historical vehicle, or the secret pet name that a long-dead husband used for his wife. One boy in England recalled being a World War II pilot. He gave such a wealth of precise information about the aircraft, his squadron, and the circumstances of his death that investigators were able to pinpoint a real pilot whose life and death matched the child's story down to the name of the pilot's best friend. Such cases go far beyond the notion of an overactive imagination. One compelling line of evidence lies in historical details that were not readily accessible or even recorded in mainstream sources. Recall Mikhail's memory of blood on the curtains in the Volkov assassination. That was a detail buried in an old Soviet police report, not something one could find in a casual encyclopedia or rumor. Or consider Julia's knowledge of mafia execution methods and the fate of Angelo De Luca. She described exactly what happened to him, being tied to weights and sunk in the ocean, which was not common knowledge. though it matched exactly the rumor that had circulated quietly among journalists. She even named 2 men who had been involved in his murder, one of whom was still alive and living in Palermo. And then she told them where her body had been dumped. All of these details were later corroborated by independent sources. If 1 or 2 cases had this level of uncanny accuracy, one might write it off as chance or some peculiar fluke. But dozens and dozens of cases worldwide show similar patterns. The fluke hypothesis strains under its own weight. Another line of evidence is physical. As we've discussed, many of these children have birthmarks or birth defects corresponding to the injuries of the person they remember. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist who conducted extensive research on children's past life memories in the 20th century, documented numerous cases where medical records of a deceased individual's injuries lined up with a child's birthmarks. Imagine a man who died of a shotgun blast to the chest. A few years later, a child is born with an array of round pellet-like birthmarks on his chest in a similar pattern. Stevenson collected dozens of such cases. In our narrative here, we saw examples like Niran's chest scar, Aung Min's back mark, and Obina's neck mark, all aligning with their stories. While one could argue that birthmarks are common and easily found where one wishes to see significance, the specific correspondence and the presence of the memory story alongside it present a combined phenomena that is decidedly harder to dismiss. Then there is the matter of verification from independent sources. In many of these cases, once the child's statements are recorded, adults have gone to verify them. They travel to the village or city the child named to see if the person and events exist as described. More often than not, they do. Skeptical parents become convinced when they see their young son or daughter navigate a place they've never been as if they lived there, greeting strangers by old familiar names. Law enforcement and journalists have also played a role. Police reopened cases, as in Burma and Thailand, because details given by a child matched hidden facts, leading to confessions. Journalists have investigated stories like Julia's, and while maybe not solving them by legal standards, have confirmed that what she said aligns with records and insider knowledge. Researchers in psychology and anthropology have documented these accounts, often under peer scrutiny. One such researcher noted that the consistency of cases across vastly different cultures, where the families had no way of knowing about each other, strongly suggests a real phenomenon at work. The families from Lebanon to India to America are not reading each other's stories on the internet and then crafting copycat tales. Many come from remote areas or were reported before any media coverage. Furthermore, when outside experts examine these children, they generally find them mentally healthy and not prone to fabrication. These kids are not attention-seeking masterminds. If anything, many are relieved when the memories fade and they can just be normal children again. Some are even shy or reluctant to speak about their memories, doing so only because of inner distress or persistent questioning by parents. In several cases, the children themselves expressed frustration that no one believed them initially. They weren't trying to convince others to gain something. They were trying to share something that was burdening them. The unburied truths that surface through these cases force us to revisit some fundamental assumptions. For instance, the assumption that consciousness is produced solely by the brain and ends at death is challenged if even one of these cases is genuine. If little Samir was truly recalling the life of another person, it implies that memory, and perhaps personal identity, can exist independently of the brain that originally encoded it. Or consider the implication of Amira's ancient memory. How could information be preserved across 3,000 years, skipping dozens of generations, to emerge in a child so distant from the original context? The questions raised touch on fields as disparate as neuroscience, quantum physics, theology, and ethics. Science, as of now, does not have a clear explanation for these cases. The mainstream view might file them away as anomalies, ripe for further study, but not yet theory-shattering. And indeed, one must be cautious. Not every claim of a past life memory holds up to scrutiny. Some turn out to be fantasies or misunderstandings or cannot be verified. But those that do hold up demand an open-minded investigation. One possibility sometimes floated is the notion of a collective unconscious or some kind of inherited memory in the human psyche. Could it be that under certain conditions, a child taps into a well of memories that are not personal, but belong to humanity at large or to their ancestral line? This might explain knowledge of historical events, but it's harder to reconcile with the personal connection these kids feel. They identify as a specific individual, not just witnessing generic past scenes, and their emotional attachment to that individual's family. Collective memory also wouldn't account for birthmarks matching a specific person's wounds. Another theory is that some form of spirit or imprint attaches to the child, essentially a form of possession or haunting rather than true reincarnation. Perhaps, some say, the child is clairvoyantly picking up a lingering ghost's memories rather than actually having lived that life. This interpretation might appease those who have religious objections to reincarnation, yet believe in spirits. However, it doesn't neatly explain why the memories would fade when the child gets older, or why they would have physical marks. If a ghost can imprint on a baby, that implies a transfer of information at the earliest stages of life. Again, a puzzle for any known science. This has been an excerpt from Reincarnation Files by Sam Elliott. Check out Elliott's new book, Paranormal Imprints, for an in-depth look to how some ghosts leave a mark on reality. Paranormal Imprints by Sam Elliott is available now.